Welcome to Landwards, the podcast for the land-based engineering community, brought to you by the Institution of Agricultural Engineers.
Welcome to the I Agree's Landwards podcast. I'm your host, Andy Newbold, and I am joined today by William Tuer, who is a member of the I Agree, sits on the I Agree Council, and is a rural entrepreneur. Hello, William.
Hi, Andy.
How are you doing?
I'm not too bad, thank you. Yeah.
Good man. Let's start at the beginning, shall we? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, Andy, I'm a farmer's son from the central uplands of Cumbria. So I'm a mixed family farm of beef, sheep, and cereals in a very lovely area of the countryside, but a particularly hard area for farming. So I grew up on our family farm, which we still have today, been exposed to all the excitements and joys and realities of the farming world. But it's all from an engineering point of view. My dad was actually a trained engineer who specialised in Cummins engines in HGVs. And at in his mid-20s, he came onto the family farm, which was my mother's farm, and became a full-time farmer. And that's sort of really where my background in agricultural engineering sort of kindles. He was a really good engineer, still is. He is very good at turning his hand to many things, whether it be fixing a tractor, building a shed, laying water pipe to put some water feeds in somewhere, just really an all-rounder. And from a very early age, I used to follow him around the farm, particularly when it was involved spannering, fixing, repairing, listening to him curse at problems, fix things. And yeah, that was, so my upbringing really was very, very engineering based, even though I was a farmer. And we, as I grew older, from my sort of into my early teens, I began to look at, wanting to develop that more. So at a roundabout when I was 14, my dad sent me down to the local engineers in the village. He was an agricultural engineer, and I would go there weekends firstly, and then I used to go down after school, and it was a fantastic grounding, really. I learned how to fix a huge array of the good, the bad, and the ugly. So from hay bobs, balers, very old tractors, to vans and cars, cattle crushers, and also do some metal fabrication. And that really set me on the road of essentially becoming an engineer.
You talked about, do you want to tell us about school and about whether you had any issues with education and development?
Yeah, so I'm heavily dyslexic. Maybe not as bad as I was when I was growing up. I've probably become good at managing it, but I was classed as severely dyslexic from a very early age at school. That presented a lot of problems for me in primary and parts of secondary, but I think I've learned to overcome them. When I went on to university, I got a lot of support. That really helped. I learned maybe to deal with it better myself. But dyslexia was a real, part of my life, essentially. I think what happened was from a very early age, I was very good with turning my hands to things. So whether it was fixing my bike, taking something to pieces and rebuilding it. And at that age, at an early sort of teenage age, or actually below that, from sort of when I was 8 onwards, I was seeing a specialist for them to try and understand what was wrong. And essentially I was dyslexic, but they couldn't work it out. I could rebuild an engine, I could put my bike back together, I could take it to pieces and put it back together. And that baffled both the school and the specialists, that actually I could not read and write. I knew what was going on in my head, but I could never put that pen to paper and write it down. And eventually I got some specialist help from when I was about 10 onwards, and that started to really, get me going. I come from a background, as I said, a farmer, but we also had a lot of tourism. So we had holiday cottage, bed and breakfast, caravanners, and that actually helped with the confidence point of view. So I was as I grew up, I became a lot more confident with talking to people I didn't know, dealing with people who I didn't know, and I felt that was probably, when I look back on it now, was a real help, both to me as a person, but also help with my dyslexia. It gave me the confidence to maybe talk about it and address the situation, but also made me not afraid to talk about it.
And do you feel like your dyslexia excluded you?
It did initially, yes. When I was very early at school, I was put into what was essentially then remedial classes, and I got very bored and I got very fed up. I understood what I was being taught. I could work it out in my head. I had no issues. I got very bored because I'd within 5 minutes of walking into them classes, I'd understood what I was being taught, but I couldn't put that pen to paper and I couldn't write it down, and I struggled to even read it back to the teachers. That was a really difficult thing. But then, as eventually people understood what dyslexia was and what type of dyslexia I had, it was actually dyslexia and that I was severely dyslexic, things got easier. So I started to get different support. Teachers started to understand, different ways of teaching me. And that helped greatly. So as I moved into secondary education and then on to university, it became much less of a challenge. It was from where I'd come from. I began to find that I was no different to anybody else.
Why did you decide to become an agricultural engineer?
Oh, that's a good question, Andy, which I probably ask myself on certain days a lot. As I said, back in my growing up, my dad was an engineer. Then I got exposed to engineering. I think it's because it was a mix of the practical, hands-on, challenging your brain, especially with agricultural engineering. When I set off working at the engineers down my village, I suddenly realized the diversity of what I was doing or the challenges I had to face. So one day you could be fixing a tractor, you might be servicing it. The next day I might be working out how to cut some joints for a shed extension, or put together an extension to a gate. Lots of things which involve lots of different skills. So it was never dull. The range of equipment which came through that workshop was very, very varied and wide. And I really enjoyed that. I really blossomed in that environment. And that's sort of where I went forward from that, realizing actually this is a really interesting career, and I wanted to develop it basically.
What did you study?
So initially I came out of school with GCSEs. My dyslexia meant I was not particularly academic, and my grading reflected that. So I went to our local college, which is the former Newton Rig, and I studied an ND in agricultural engineering, a BTEC in motor vehicle repairs, and then some more BTECs in welding. So it was a 2-year course. That set me up fantastically to see what I wanted to do in later life. And at that time, I hadn't really decided. I hadn't actually thought I would get into university at all, because of the issues I'd had at school with my dyslexia and the grades. But I did reasonably well at Newton Rig, and I went to Harper Adams to an open day, and I met several tutors. We talked to them, and I was actually accepted in there. So I went off then to Harper Adams once I'd finished at Newton Rig to do a HND in engineering design and development. And that was another fantastic step for me. I got a lot of support at Harper Adams in my learning. I'm dyslexic, but also it's a great university for engineering, especially agricultural engineering.
It's pleasing to hear that you were also the course representative, because that's a seat I kept warm in 1991 to 1993 for BEng as well. So,
yeah, it's actually a really rewarding role to be chosen by your colleagues to be a course representative and immerse yourselves in the other aspects of university which you wouldn't always see. So having to, the early, I would say, the early skills of moving on into business, I think it was a really helpful thing, developing my social skills, developing my skills of dealing with people and understanding different opinions and respecting people's judgments and opinions on situations, and also building some great friendships.
Oh. No, it's a fair comment. So following Harper, what was your route into the industry?
Well, I would always see it as a little bit of luck, or a lot of luck in my case. So while I was at Harper, we obviously had a year out where we had to choose an employer. And I wrote to several, and I actually got accepted for an interview at John Deere from initially my 6 months placement period. So off I trotted to Langer as a very naive engineer, and I sat in a room full of I would say there was 12 of us or 14 of us, and I remember this was a completely different world to me. But I was interviewed by 3 or 4 people. I think 2 of them are still at John Deere to this day, and I got accepted as a position initially for what was called SAP implementation, which is a rather bizarre title, but it was basically looking at the integration of a management system into John Deere to help manage the whole goods and the pricing of equipment. It was, in a way, it was completely almost alien to me, was that, but actually a very interesting project. So I did initially 4 months, and then I moved very quickly into supporting engineering at John Deere for another 2 months. And then I got another 6 months placement offered to me in parts and service marketing. And that was really my development into the industry. So I went back to Harper and finished my HND. At that time, I was undecided what I was going to do, but my initial hopes were to top up to a degree. So I finished my HND and then top up to a degree. But just as I was finishing my HND, I received a phone call from John Deere and asked me if I was interested in a position which had become available in the commercial division. And it was a sales demonstrator instructor job. And I was kind of taken a little bit aback by that. So off again, I trotted to Langer and I had a chat with David Hart. And I was offered a position as a sales demonstrator instructor. And so 2 months later, after finishing my studies at Harper, having a couple of weeks at home, shearing the sheep, helping with some fencing work, I off again with my car full off down to Langer, and that was the start of my career, really. I was kind of in a little sort of feeling this is very bizarre. I was a farmer's son from Cumbria. I was dyslexic, and I'd ended up at one of the largest machinery manufacturers in the world. So for the first sort of 6 months, it all seemed very surreal. But from that point onwards, I really prospered. I was in John Deere with a great set of lads. I shared a house with some other lads who just started in John Deere doing various different roles, and it was a fantastic starting position for my career. So I was exposed to both sales, service and engineering in that role for the commercial side. So I covered golf courses, local councils, large accounts dealing with the commercial side of the business, which is golf and turf, commercial mowing. So I would be in charge of demonstrations, in charge of sales training, delivering sales training to the dealer network. And then as my role developed, I moved in to do some sales training, and then managing shows and events in the division. And it was an extremely diverse role, and it gave me a great insight into the varied positions at John Deere, from both sales, service, marketing, and engineering.
Just, going on from your first position with John Deere, tell us a bit more about your journey and how it's led you to where you are today.
So my journey, it's been a sort of it's not certainly been a straight path, and I've always been very open-minded to take experiences and understand different aspects of businesses, the sector we work in. So when I was, I think I'd done 4 years as the sales demonstrator instructor. I was approached by one of the managers asking would I consider moving over to the ag side into the service department, and I would initially start covering the UK for hay and forage equipment. So that was supporting balers, mowers, and then the service advisor aspect, which was a technical diagnostics tool which John Deere uses to interface with their equipment. So I stepped into that role just as the season started in, I think it was around about May, June time. So I was very quickly onto the road, into the field with dealers, looking at equipment failure, looking at optimization, helping the service team, the John Deere service team across the UK. And I loved that job. It was absolutely fantastic. And as I grew, because I'd come off a farm, I had a good understanding of silage, hay, mowers, mowcos, balers. It was a big benefit, that, and I did well in that job. And eventually, I was offered the opportunity to take on a larger area. So then I started working across Europe in what's called the DTAC. So there was a reorganisation. So that's in Deere, and that resulted in me moving into the dealer technical area. So more expertise, but covering from a European area. And I also took on the forager product line in the UK and Ireland, and offered support across English-speaking countries in Western Europe. When I say English-speaking, so where if there was a requirement for an English-speaking support in them other European countries, I would be asked to assist with that. And again, so that was a great opportunity for me. I learned a lot about engineering. I was involved in several projects in fetching new equipment to the market. So that was from the concept through to the development, through to the field testing, and then to the introduction. And that was a real good grounding to the process of engineering, the costs associated with it, but also the concept of fetching something to the marketplace. From that, I did that until I think it was late 2009. And I was approached, did I want to move into the sales side? And that was something I'd seen, and I thought, well, yeah, why not? So I became a territory manager covering a dealer network from, which basically covered the northern England and southern Scotland. And that gave me a great exposure to the actual financials of the agricultural machinery market. So dealers, incentivizing dealers to sell, engaging customers in the process, customer satisfaction, and everything which goes with it. So I spent 4 years in that role, which fetches us a little bit closer to what I'm doing today. As during that time, I'd always been very interested in renewables, I'd shown a particular interest in what was the Harvest Lab product on the foragers back in my service days, because that was developed heavily in Germany on anaerobic digesters. I'd always wanted at some point to become involved in emerging technologies, the renewables, and I made a decision to move out of the sector essentially, or out of the business, into something more closely related to where I am today. So following a very short stint at a dealer, I moved to a company that was selling anaerobic digesters, or actually we're importing a design from Austria into the UK. And I went to work for them. So it was an absolute complete change. It was a really big gamble for me. I put myself out of my comfort zone, essentially. But I found that role really, really interesting, because it was actually a very technically based role, in that when you were approaching a customer to sell an AD plant, you were looking at so many different aspects. And a lot of them aspects are actually engineering based, whether it be the crop, whether it be the site that they wanted to build the AD plant on, whether it be the technology that they were looking at the plant. So that was a really interesting role. And I did that role for 3 years, which brings us to where we are today, where I'm managing an AD plant. I'm doing consultancy work across several others, and also doing consultancy work in the agricultural industry for a range of clients. And I think if I look back on it, it was really the broad experiences I gained in my career, in my early career, which helped me get to where I am today.
So just give us a bit more detail about the day job now.
So my day job is quite diverse. I have sort of 3 to 4 main factors which affect my day job, or what I do. So firstly being, I manage a large anaerobic digester and farming enterprise at Dumfries for a landowner. Both of us, both the landowner and myself, are very hands-on in that role. So we manage that business both from a sort of a technology-based point of view. So we tend to remotely manage that. We have a team there, a contractor which operates the farm. He runs the AD plant, and he does the hands-on role, as we say, spanners and shovels and brushes, with myself looking at the business from a management perspective. So whether that's the biology of the AD plant, whether it's the electrical connection, whether it's the generation, or whether it's the feedstock, I'm overseeing what happens at that site and making sure that it performs the best it can, has the best feedstock into the plant, and is getting the best return on its investment from the electricity that it produces, but also the heat. So that's my first aspect. My second aspect would be the family farm. So I'm still heavily involved with my parents in the family farm. It is a small farm, but it does take up a lot of my time. We have some sheep, we have some pigs, and we have a very large tourism enterprise which is growing. So that's glamping, camping, holiday cottages, and some limited bed and breakfast. But the interesting thing with that is it is all linked to the farm. That is very much a business which is linked to the environment it's in. So the people coming to the glamping site, or even to the camping site, are coming because they feel they are part of the business that it represents. So a small family farm, and we have to farm in a way which essentially represents that. And then the final aspect is my consultancy, and my consultancy ranges from simply diagnosing issues on AD plants and its associated equipment, through to a certain level of bespoke work with agricultural investment. So I will engage in some work around consultancy around agricultural investments, and it would be one of the more difficult to talk about aspects of my role, because some of my clients would request that I don't talk about that role.
You could tell us, but then you'd have to kill us.
Correct, Andy. Or they may kill me. That might be the
right. Well, in that case, I think on that slightly sinister note, I think we'll move on onto some slightly thicker ice, some slightly more sensible ground. What role does volunteering play in your life?
Yeah, again, another interesting one. I had to think a little bit. It actually takes up a lot more of my life than I probably realised, which involves a lot of juggling. But I've been involved for several years, actually probably over a decade now, in a organisation, a voluntary organisation called the Landwards Ski Club. And claim to fame is we have the longest ski lift in England, and that's a real ski lift on real snow when it snows. So Landwards is a ski club located high in the Pennines above Alston. We go up above 700 meters. We'll experience around about 28 days of skiing on real snow, and we have a pommel lift, which was imported from the continent around about 25 years ago, and we have a large piece basher, which is a rather nice piece of kit, bombardier, and then all the associated things which go with that. So that's a voluntary organisation. We have members who can join the ski club, and you can ski up there when it snows or the conditions dictate. And it's a really interesting organisation because it presents me with a lot of different people from different backgrounds with different needs. And I felt it was something very different from what I would normally be involved in, and it's made me look at maybe the world in a more broader profile, because I'm dealing with people from very, very different backgrounds. And I think one thing in agriculture is we're often involved with people in agriculture, and in agricultural engineering, we're always involved with other people in agricultural engineering, and we don't probably get out of that often. And I think that role has helped me greatly look a little bit outside the box, might be the word. And really the great work that it does, it offers a way of people in the UK to ski on a low cost basis, so that the philosophy of the organisation is to make skiing available to everybody that can participate in it at the minimum cost possible. And it's a great organisation in doing that, and it has a great following, a really good membership, and considering how variable our winters can be, is a testament to the people who push that organisation forward.
I imagine you're having a bit more of a demand now that people can't get out of the country for holidays, that if you have a cold, hard winter this next year, you might get a few more members.
I think it could be a really interesting one, because we have seen during lockdown, unfortunately, this year being, or the past year, we experienced what would have been one of our best winters, but for 90% of the time we were in a lockdown situation where we couldn't allow skiing to happen. And it was quite frustrating because we were inundated by people wanting to ski, and according to the security cameras, I think quite a few people did take up the ability to get out and exercise in the fresh air, might be the way of phrasing it.
Presumably the lift wasn't.
The lift and all the facilities unfortunately had to remain closed. But moving into what we look at hopefully this year. Well, when we talk about this year, this will be this winter coming. It's not something you want to think about in the ag industry, is it? The winter coming. But hopefully we will see a cold, easterly winter for us, which will bring copious amounts of snow to the Pennines. I'm sure there's several listeners shaking their head and going, no, we don't want that, William.
I'll have a word with my dad about whether the bats are flying backwards and what he's seeing with these slugs at the moment, and we'll come back to you on that one. Shall we move on? It's not your only volunteer responsibility, is it? The Landwards Ski Club. So what else do you do?
I'm vice chairman of our local show, which is the Crosby Ravensworth Agricultural Show and Vintage Show. And it is how would I say? I would like to say it's a typical show, but it's probably one of those it's an endangered species. Actually,
it's a very special show in my limited experience.
Actually, it is, Andy, as you gave me the great pleasure of coming to judge the vintage section. I believe it wasn't it 2 years ago.
Yeah, no, it was a very nice day out and a very nice lunch. Thank you very much.
Great. I mean, it is again a great organisation to be involved in. Extremely frustrating at sometimes because you are having to balance the needs of the exhibitors with the realities of what the show and the community requires. And essentially it is a show for the community, and as rural communities have evolved, you have to try and engage that community with what you have already, so that can be the agricultural aspects, but with also new aspects, such as one of the biggest growth areas in the show has been the vintage, which is expanded out from just agricultural vintage equipment, but two is horses and dogs. And we've seen a huge growth in the eventing, gymkhanas, but also dog shows. You know, I think the dog show is probably one of the best attended aspects of the show. And that presents a lot of challenges for the committee in one, engaging with the community, getting people through the gate. Like any show, the gate is the key to it, and we've worked hard in the last few years to turn around what essentially was a failing show to something now which actually makes money. And it's important for that reason to be able to invest in the community and grow the show and represent all those in the community.
Is it fair to ask whether or not there will be a show in 2021?
I think one of the great things of being a small, very flexible, small committed organisation is we can sit on the fence, Andy. Yeah. I'll coin the phrase. And
well, you won't be the only one locally. Speaking as the secretary of Killington Sports, we've sat on the fence for 2 months, and unfortunately, we have pulled the plug now. But be that as it may,
we are in a position where we may run aspects of the show, subject to the local community engaging behind this, where we can. Yep. In it, we've set out the stall essentially that we will run if we can. And as long as we can maintain a level of requirement on social distancing, again, all subject to what may change. And as we've learned in the last year and a half, these things will change day by day.
It is dynamic.
We do hope we can return, because we were a late show, so at the end of August. We generally catch the end of the holiday season. So we do have hopes that we will have something on the show field. What it may be is yet to be known, Andy.
Who knows? Let's go back to ag engineering briefly. And these two questions are probably, I'll say, conjoined. Where do you see agricultural engineering as a discipline going? And also, what do you think the key issues are in the world? Because I think those two together fit quite nicely.
Yeah, that's agricultural engineering is an interesting discipline, and I think the great thing about it is the sector is extremely broad. So as agricultural engineers, we're subject to the environment, the weather, technology, and market demands. And where it goes is, I think we have to reflect on them and think we cannot stand still. Consumer habits are evolving, growing patterns across the world and across our own doorsteps that are changing. Dietary habits are changing, and ultimately that filters down to the very job we do as agricultural engineers. And that is, in one way, is a key opportunity, but also it's a key issue with agricultural engineering. You know, as engineers, we have to take on board a huge amount of change in technology, on changing requirements from producers, and that makes it challenging as both business, as if you're an agricultural engineer or a franchisee or just a consultant engineer. We have to adopt very quickly to changing situations. So that would be, I think, I would see it as a key issue, but also that is a key opportunity for us. As agricultural engineers, I think it's in our instinct is if there's a problem, we'll resolve it. We might not solve the problem fully at that point in time, but we'll find a way around it. We'll adopt and we'll present the customer with some solution. And I think we should always bear that in mind as markets changes and evolves.
Yeah, well, big challenges throw up big solutions, don't they? And I think it's, there's that twee phrase about it's a great time to be an engineer, but it is a great time to be an engineer because the world's got some fundamental challenges, and we're going to need some thinking. So it's a good thing. Finally, what advice would you offer to anyone considering agricultural engineering as a career?
I think I've aired on it a little bit, but I'll summarise that in actually I was dyslexic. I had some real challenges at school, but I was allowed into the industry and embraced. And I think that sums it up. Is it's a very engaging and rewarding industry. The people are very welcoming. It's quite a small community, which actually helps in being able to grow in the industry. And it's very diverse. I mean, if I'd look back on my teenage years and thinking, even when I started at John Deere in my first job, I have no thoughts that I would be sat here today talking to you, Andy, about my life, anaerobic digestion, and a ski club. So the industry will provide you with really great opportunities. And actually, one thing it is it gives you a long-term stable career. There's plenty of paths you can go down within the industry to do something different. You maybe want to do something different, but it doesn't necessarily mean you need to leave the industry.
No. Just keep moving. Just keep moving forward.
Keep moving forward.
Yeah. William Tuer, thank you very much for a fascinating conversation. I think we could probably run and run given what we've talked about so far. But I'd like to thank you for your time today, and thank you for your positive and encouraging words. That it's very inclusive, and there's something there for everybody. I think we can all reflect on that in our own paths in ag engineering. And I certainly am very grateful for what it's given me. So I'm grateful for your insight, William. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy.
For more information, visit www.iagri.org. You have been listening to Landwards, the podcast for the land-based engineering community, brought to you by the Institution of Agricultural Engineers.